The sun was disappearing behind jagged hills as Jedediah rode the last stretch toward his weather-beaten homestead. The dusty wind carried a faint, unnatural sound, a shudder in the stillness that set his instincts on edge. Ahead, near the brink of his property, a figure lay crumpled against the dry earth, half hidden by thorny brush. His horse snorted nervously. Jedediah urged it forward, gripping reins tighter, heart pounding, not only from the ride, but from a sudden surge of apprehension. In the Wild West, strangers meant trouble, and the woman he'd soon find was unlike any he'd ever encountered. His farm sat alone on the edge of the wilderness, a solitary speck in the vast expanse of cracked soil and brittle sagebrush. The earth, baked under a ruthless sun all day, held the haunting scent of dry dust and dying grass. Far above, the sky stretched clear and endless, an ocean of amber fading into violet. The only sounds were the whispering wind and his footsteps against parched ground. This was a place ruled by silence and hardship, where loneliness settled deep into the bones, much like the sunburned lines etched on Jedediah's face. Here, survival was a daily victory, wrested from stubborn land and the prickling threat of the unknown beyond each ridge. Jedediah was a man carved by those harsh winds, a loner by choice and circumstance. Years of solitude had made him wary, his gaze sharp as a hawk's, and his heart locked behind walls built from past betrayals and loss. His hands, calloused and steady, knew the labor of tilling rough soil and repairing broken fences, but seldom they moved to mercy or kindness. Yet that night, something shifted when he spotted the ragged shape trembling just beyond the fence line. A frail, dark-haired woman, her skin dusted with dirt and stained with blood, struggling through the quiet agony of pain. The wound on her side told a story of violence that the cool desert air seemed to hush. Jedediah's breath caught. Helping her meant crossing invisible lines, risking wrath from nearby townsfolk, or worse, tribal warriors who would come searching for her. Still, the man's gaze softened, and a flicker of something long buried awakened, compassion. He dismounted, every movement deliberate but gentle, wary of the woman's silence and the fierce gleam in her swollen eyes. Kneeling by her side, he offered his canteen, the cold water slick against his rough palm as he lifted it to her cracked lips. She drank slowly, warily accepting this lifeline from a stranger. Her breaths were shallow, her body trembling against the creeping chill of nightfall. But the grip of pain in her eyes remained strong, unyielding, like the history buried deep in her soul. Jedediah considered his options swiftly. Leaving her meant letting death claim what might be precious. Helping could unleash chaos. With a quiet decision, he hoisted her with care, carrying her toward the modest shelter of his cabin, a simple refuge forged from weathered logs and stubborn hope. Inside, the heat of the hearth flickered, casting dancing shadows across their booth of broken silences. Jedediah's fingers moved to clean the worst of her wounds, while the woman, speechless, watched with eyes that held storms and secrets. Neither spoke of their fears or who might be hunting her. Instead, the room seemed to pulse with the fragile thread of trust being spun, trembling under the weight of a shared moment that neither fully understood. In the freezing wild, compassion was a dangerous gamble. For Jedediah, this choice would ripple far beyond the night. As dawn pushed back the darkness, pale light seeped through worn shutters, illuminating the woman's face, now less strained, her eyes gradually regaining strength beneath heavy lids. The still morning air held a deceptive calm, broken only by an ominous rhythm, faint hooves beating on distant earth, the rising thunder of many riders sweeping over the horizon. Jedediah's gaze snapped toward the east. The silhouette of a column of mounted warriors crowned the ridge. The Apache tribe, advancing fast and silent like a tempest, ready to crash. His heartbeat quickened, a knot of dread and anticipation tensing every muscle. Whatever path fate had carved this fragile alliance upon, it was about to be tested. Many companions who walk the paths of forgotten legends warn that destiny, or the treacherous algorithm of YouTube, sometimes silently unravels subscriptions before the next dangerous trail unfolds. Before the coming storm reveals new twists, take a moment to check below and make sure your place remains among our band, so none of the voices from this valley fade before you hear their tale. Confirm your subscription now and join the saga that only grows beneath these endless skies. Jedediah stood at the edge of his homestead, the crisp morning light casting long shadows behind a gathering dust cloud on the distant horizon. His hand hovered near the worn grip of his rifle, eyes narrow and heart taut between hope and caution. Nayeli, the Apache woman he had tended through the night, sat quietly on the porch steps, her gaze distant but clearer, lips barely parted as if teasing the words that struggled to find voice. She reached out, trembling fingers brushing the coarse fabric of Jedediah's shirt. Her voice, hoarse from pain and silence, barely broke the morning stillness. "They come, not all friendly," she whispered, eyes flicking toward the steaming trails the riders kicked up. "My people, my tribe, to see if I live or judge you." Jedediah swallowed hard, the weight of her words sinking deep. His solitude had been broken by a flicker of compassion, now threatened by the uncertain judgment of warriors, whose customs and codes he respected but barely understood. He wanted to retreat, to bury himself once again in the harsh certainty of the land. But something, honor perhaps, or a stubborn resolve, rooted him in place. As the dust settled, horses appeared like ghosts beneath the shimmering heat. A procession formed with regimented calm, the riders loose but purposeful. Their banners were absent, their intent carved in the steady cadence of their approach. Leading them was a tall man crowned with dark hair bound tightly, a leader's stance etched in every line of his face. Tayen. The leader's eyes swept over Jedediah with measured suspicion, lips pressed thin like a drawn bowstring. The moment stretched thin and sharp as winter ice. Jedediah stepped forward, voice steady, despite the storm twisting inside him. "I found her near the creek, badly hurt. Gave her water, shelter, nothing more. Tian's gaze never faltered. "You walk on sacred lands," he said quietly, each word carefully chosen. "You cross lines known to all Apache blood. Why should my tribe trust a lone white man with wounds like those?" Jedediah met the challenge without falter. "Because she lived, and I kept her safe. The land is hard, and doesn't care who tends to it." Nayeli shifted, finally speaking more clearly, her voice summoning strength from the well of survival. "Tayan, my brother, she saved me. If you doubt, look to the woman who lives, not the man who offers shelter." Murmurs stirred among the approaching riders. Some nodded, others tightened their grips on painted rifles and war clubs. Tayan's eyes flicked to her, then back to Jedediah. "Compassion is not weakness," he admitted, though the suspicion lingered like smoke in a cabin. "But trust must be earned. Your hands have wiped the blood of an Apache. Your heart, does it bleed like ours?" Jedediah's throat tightened. He remembered the quiet graves left behind by hatred and fear. "I carry wounds of a different sort. Loyalty is a choice, not a birthright." The wind shifted, carrying no warmth. From behind the veil of mesquite and sagebrush, a shadow lingered, a figure creeping through brush with eyes sharp as a falcon's. A hunter, watching the meeting from a distance, his silence like a gathering storm. The presence of this unknown threat tightened the air. A fragile piece poised on a knife's edge. Tayan's head jerked slightly, a subtle signal that did not go unnoticed by his warriors. "Strangers watch us," he murmured. "Peace is a treasure hard won here." Jedediah's fingers curled around the leather of his holster, senses sharpened by the unwelcome gaze. The hunter's eyes cut through the heat waves, waiting, calculating. The fragile alliance between man and tribe, now tainted by a silent danger hidden in the borderlands. Nayeli's eyes locked on Tayan, her voice steady but low. "We cannot stay divided. We see the same horizon, the same enemies. Judgments do not help when we fight shadows." Tayan's stern expression softened marginally, though the warrior in him remained wary. "These lands demand respect and strength, Jedediah. Prove yourself in silence as much as in words." As the riders settled their horses, the first act of uneasy truce took root in a tense circle at the edge of the homestead. Jedediah felt the eyes of the tribe, judging, testing, weighing every breath, every movement. Yet beneath the suspicion, under the wary glances, a spark lingered. Perhaps the flicker of a chance long denied by history's bitter winds. The sun slid higher, baking the earth and drying the sweat on their brows. Nayeli leaned closer, voice a thread between them. "Tayan carries the weight of his people's scars. He fears not just for me, but for all. We must show them we can stand together before blood decides otherwise." Jedediah nodded. The man who had wandered alone since loss and silence found a new reason to stay, if only for this fragile hope tethering him to the woman and this fierce tribe. Across the ridge, the watcher remained, unseen yet perilous, a hunter not of words, but of shadows. His intentions darkened the morning's fragile peace. Jedediah's jaw clenched. The fight was no longer just for survival. It was for trust, for a fragile brotherhood forged in the unforgiving wild. And as the sun reached its zenith, none of them noticed the faint, unmistakable twang of a bowstring pulled tight in the distant brush. a herald of danger about to unspool the fragile peace. The night had settled deep over the sparse camp, the sky a velvet blanket pierced by countless stars. Jedediah crouched beside Nayeli's small fire, the flickering flames casting a warm glow that softened her sharp features. She leaned heavily on a fallen log, her body still marked by pain, but more lucid than before. Around them, the Apache tribe's warriors and elders had gathered in low murmurs, their voices a cautious symphony spiked with distrust. Jedediah's voice was a quiet thread weaving through the dense silence. Your people's stories, the land you speak of, it's more than just ground and sky, isn't it? Nayeli's dark eyes gleamed in the firelight. It is our blood, our memory, every tree, every stone, part of who we are. She shifted slightly, wincing. I was born to these stories, but lately the past feels like a weight pulling me under. Tayan stood a little distance away with his counsel, his brow furrowed as he listened to the conversation, every muscle taut like a drawn bow. The air was thick with simmering questions. Could this lone man from the white settlers' world truly honor all that their tribe stood for? Would he become a bridge or a chasm? By the fire, Jedediah took a deep breath, pushing back the years of solitude and suspicion that clung to him like dust on old leather. I want to understand, he said, softly. I won't pretend to know your ways, but I've learned to listen to the land. Maybe that can be a start. Nayeli nodded faintly, a fragile thread connecting them, a shared reverence for survival and respect. But from the shadowed perimeter, wary eyes tracked every movement. The camp's peace was not promised. That night, as the embers grew low, Tayan conferred with his closest warriors, weighing tradition against the unusual circumstance that had brought them here. A sick woman saved by an outsider. His voice was low, yet firm. This man honors her, yes. But can his honor protect us? Will our enemies see us as divided, or will we stand as one? A chorus of quiet grumbles answered him. Some warriors exchanged uncertain glances, their hands never far from weapons carved with ancestral symbols. Suddenly, a sharp crack shattered the night's fragile calm. From the dense thickets beyond, a volley of arrows hissed through the air. Yells rose, a startled drumbeat of chaos. Tayan's hand shot up, ordering shields raised. Men drawing bows and rifles amid the startled horses' whinnies. Jedediah's body tensed, instincts sharpening. Without hesitation, he sprang toward the nearest flash of movement, where a young boy skidded, trapped beneath a fallen branch. The child's wide eyes met Jedediah's, terror blazing bright in the firelight. With a grunt, Jedediah tore away the timber, lifting the boy free just as another arrow buried itself in the earth where his feet had stood moments before. The rescuers formed a shield around the boy, fear and determination flooding their faces. Amid the scramble, Nayeli worked swiftly, issuing orders with a calm born of hard experience. The attackers, baited and unseen shadows, retreated back into the blackness from where they had come, but not before leaving a warning mark. The fragile alliance was under threat. Tayan approached Jedediah, his gaze a mixture of cautious respect and skepticism. You risked your life to save my brother. Such actions speak louder than words on a quiet night. Jedediah exhaled slowly, the weight of that moment settling like dust on leather. We survive or we perish together. That much I understand. Yet even as the camp tended to the wounded and reforged their shaky bonds, whispers of doubt curled among the warriors. Some grumbled, their loyalty caught between tradition and the unknown. Others eyed Jedediah's every gesture, unwilling to forget centuries of conflict embedded deep in their bones. Nayeli looked toward Tayon, her voice resolute. We cannot sit divided, waiting for shadows to strike. If we falter in fear, we lose more than battles. We lose our future. Tayon's eyes softened, the tension easing ever so slightly. Then let this night be a sign, not of weakness, but of a new path, one forged by shared blood and courage. Jedediah's gaze lifted to the wide dark above, where distant stars blinked silently. Among the tribe's cautious acceptance, a thin thread of hope began to weave itself through the night. But beyond the flickering campfires, hidden within the tangled brush, the hunter still watched, his eyes sharp, his presence cold as the desert night. A soft twang split the air, the unmistakable twang of a bowstring pulled tight. The fragile peace shattered. And in that suspended breath before chaos, Jedediah's hand tightened on his rifle, his body poised between trust and war. The dawn's first light draped the camp in a thin veil of gold, as the uneasy alliance began to solidify. The night's cold echoes still lingered in the wary eyes of the Apache warriors, their bodies poised between tradition and trust. Jedediah sat near the fire's dying embers, his gaze distant, yet sharp as the brittle branches whispering in the dry desert breeze. His hands, though steady as always, betrayed a flicker of tension. Old resentments and fresh fears writhed beneath the surface. Nayeli's voice cut through the silence, fragile, yet firm. The wound was more than flesh deep, she whispered, fingers tracing the rough edge of her bandages. It's the weight of blood that paints old grudges on this land. Her eyes met Jedediah's, searching for understanding beyond their shared pain. Those who struck me did not merely seek revenge. They aimed to break us, to shatter what little peace we might forge. Jedediah swallowed, the bitter tang of guilt heavy on his tongue. Your enemy, they mean to divide and conquer, he said, voice low and gravelly. But the land remembers my steps too. I know where to hide, how to move unseen where danger thrives. A flicker of hope sparked briefly in Nayeli's gaze. Then maybe your knowledge can shield us all. Her words were an invitation, fragile as brittle earth, yet potent with possibility. From the shadows, Tayon's presence loomed, his broad shoulders tense beneath worn leather, eyes shadowed by the weight of leadership. Old wounds run deep, he muttered, voice rough like stones rubbed raw. But if we cannot trust one another, the enemy wins without firing a shot. His gaze pierced Jedediah, then softened. A steel blade turned to tempered iron. You offer refuge, but do your heart's depths hold the courage to protect what's sacred? Jedediah nodded slowly. The lone man who once lived by the law of silence, now bound by a newfound purpose. I'm no stranger to protecting what's dear. It's a gamble with death every day out here. His fingers brushed the worn grip of his rifle, a silent vow. The camp stirred uneasily as warriors exchanged glances, some skeptical, others grudgingly hopeful. Yet beneath the simmering tension, a silent fissure cracked wider. That morning's fragile accord was about to snap. Jedediah gathered the council beneath the sprawling branches of a gnarled mesquite tree, the sun darting fragmented shadows across hardened faces. Nayeli stood nearby, her posture steadied by renewed purpose, despite the lingering pain in her side. Tyann addressed the group with a tone both commanding and cautious. "There's a path forward." Jedediah began, voice steady and deliberate. "Enemy scouts have come close before. They know these lands, but so do we. I propose a strategy, one that uses the terrain we know, the hidden canyons and ridges, to outwit them. We don't fight head-on. We strike when they least expect, then vanish like dust on the wind." A murmur rippled through the warriors. Some clenched, their fists at the thought. Others questioned the wisdom of trusting an outsider's plan. Tyann's eyes narrowed. "And what of treachery within? We must be wary. Not all fight with honor. We cannot afford a knife in the back." Jedediah's gaze flicked to Nayeli, who stepped forward with quiet authority. "There's fear and truth. I have heard whispers. There is one among us whose heart beats with shadows, a traitor who feeds secrets to our enemies." The tribe stiffened. Tyann's jaw clenched. "Show me proof, or remove suspicion before it poisons us." Nayeli's eyes scanned the vigilant faces, then settled on a young warrior, Darok, a man whose stoicism had sounded false since their arrival. His brow prickled with unease beneath their gaze. "It is not proof, yet all signs point to him," she said softly. "Late night whispers, missing supplies, strange footsteps. The enemy's approach isn't chance, it's guided." Derek's hand twitched toward his knife, but Tyann's raised voice stopped him. "Hold, man. You will have your say before any blade is drawn." Jedediah stepped forward, voice firm. "If there's a traitor, we must root him out now, not after the enemy descends upon us. Our survival depends on it." The camp grew heavy with suspicion and paranoia. Eyes darted, trust eroded like dry soil under relentless drought. Nayeli's whispered revelation fractured their fragile peace, casting shadows darker than the early morning. Days passed with tense vigilance, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Patrols doubled, and Jedediah worked tirelessly, guiding the tribe to stronger positions, memorizing escape routes through jagged canyons, turning the landscape itself into their silent ally. Nayeli regained strength, her voice growing more certain, her spirit rekindled in this dangerous alliance. But the specter of betrayal gnawed at their unity. One evening, as red skies blazed with the dying sun, a sudden alarm shattered the feeble calm. Derek was found, cornered, panting, near a hidden trail, clutching a crude note stained with the blood of their kin. No words yet spoken, but the message was clear. The traitor was real, and his shadow touched their bones. Tyann's voice thundered over the murmurs. "We stand at a crossroads. The enemy closes in, and the venom of treason festers among us. We must act. Trust hangs by a thread." Jedediah's hand tightened on his rifle. Then we shatter the darkness before it consumes us all. Nayeli's gaze locked onto Taeon's, resolve burning fierce. We, fight or fall, divided. There is no middle ground. As night descended once more, the camp held its breath. The fragile alliance strained beneath the weight of secrets and suspicion, while distant howls whispered of enemies circling like wolves. And then came the low murmur, the unmistakable sound of a whispered plan betrayed. From the shadows, a figure slipped away, unseen, but no longer unnoticed. The betrayer moves in silence. The fight for survival had become a battle for trust, and the next move could unmake them all. The morning light stretched thin over the camp, shadows retreating beneath the relentless sun. Jedediah sat near the fire, the restless scrape of dry leaves stirring at his boots. His eyes, sharp and watchful, darted across the wary faces of the Apache warriors, settling into uneasy calm. The distant echoes of last night's attack still hummed softly in the air, the flicker of smoke mingling with the scent of scorched earth. Nayeli leaned against a gnarled mesquite trunk, fingers tracing the rough cloth swaddling her healing side. Her dark eyes, once clouded with pain, now burned with quiet resolve. "The wound is deeper than the flesh," she said softly, her voice a fragile thread. "They don't seek just my blood. They've come to break us, to shatter any hope we might hold." Jedediah's gaze hardened. The dirt and dust of the land mingled with a bitter taste on his tongue. Guilt wrapped tight around his chest. "Your enemies, they want us divided," he said low, voice rough like weathered bark. "But this land remembers more than hurt. I know its secrets, the places to vanish. Where danger hunts," a flicker of hope softened her fierce gaze. "Then your steps may shield us all." Her breath caught with a hint of cautious possibility. From the cluster of warriors nearby, Taeon emerged, broad and rigid as a canyon rock. Lines of age and burden carved his face. His voice came like a gravelly murmur. "Old wounds run far, Jedediah. Trust is a thin thread here, easily cut." He looked past the man, to the circle of fidgeting warriors. "But if that thread snaps, the enemy wins without a fight." Jedediah met the chief's gaze steadily. "I'm no stranger to guarding what's dear," he admitted, fingers brushing the grip of his rifle. "Out here, every day's a bet with death." The camp stirred uneasily, gripped by a current of brewing tension. Some warriors shifted, hands tightening on carved war clubs. Others exchanged glances tinged with grudging hope. Yet beneath the surface, a rift widened. Beneath the mesquite's rugged limbs, Jedediah gathered the council, their faces etched with weariness and suspicion. Nayeli stood close, her presence a steady light among them, despite the pain lingering like a shadow. Taeon spoke with careful weight. "There's a path," Jedediah began, voice measured. "Enemy scouts have probed our lands before. They think they know the trails, but so do we. I propose we use the canyons and ridges, the hidden cracks and shadows of this land, to strike unseen. We don't meet them head-on. Instead, we strike swift, then blend back into dust and wind." A low murmur swept through the circle, a mixture of approval and doubt. Some warriors nodded, fists clenched tight with resolve, Others frowned, uncertain of placing faith in an outsider's plan. Tayan's eyes narrowed, sharp as a hawk's. What of the traitor among us? If a snake nests here, it bites the hand that feeds it. His voice dropped to a growl. We cannot afford betrayal on the eve of war. Jedediah's gaze slid to Nayeli, who stepped forward, voice steady with authority. There are whispers, footsteps taken in the night, supplies gone missing. I have heard the quiet words spoken in shadows, the truth lurking beneath the surface. One of us feeds our enemies. Murmurs rose into a tense hum, eyes flickering like restless flames. Tayan's jaw tightened, voice cold and commanding. Speak plainly. Name the betrayer, or we will not move forward. Nayeli's eyes swept over the faces, finally settling on Derek, a stoic warrior whose silence had always felt heavy. His brow twitched uneasily under her steady gaze. There is no proof yet, she admitted, but the signs all point there. Strange footsteps, whispered secrets, and the enemy's approach is no accident. Derek's hand twitched toward the knife at his belt, muscles coiling in silent defiance. Tayan's voice cracked like a whip, halting him. Hold, Derek. You will answer when the time comes. Jedediah stepped forward, voice cutting through the rising storm. If a traitor walks among us, we find him now, not when the enemy stands at our gates. Our survival depends on unmasking the darkness within. The camp grew heavy with accusation and fear. Eyes darted sideways. Old wounds opened beneath the thin veil of suspicion. Nayeli's words had cracked their fragile unity. Distrust wound through the air, sharper than any knife. Days unfolded in tense vigilance. Patrols doubled their rounds. Every shadow held a question. Jedediah led scouts through twisted canyons and crevices, mapping escape routes and ambush points. Nayeli's strength bloomed anew, her voice growing firmer like the desert cracking after rain. But the weight of betrayal gnawed at the tribe, a silent poison sinking deep. One dusk, bleeding red skies bled over the camp. A piercing alarm shattered the uneasy calm. Derek was found near a secret trail, breath ragged, clutching a blood-stained note whose meaning needed no telling. The enemy's hand was closer than ever, and the traitor's shadow draped heavy over their souls. Tayan's voice rolled like thunder, fierce and unforgiving. We stand at a breaking point. Enemy crowds us, and venom festers in our midst. Action must come swiftly. Jedediah's grip tightened on the rifle, the quiet vow of the lone man, now bound to something greater. Then we strike first, before darkness consumes what little we have left. Nayeli's eyes burned into Tayan's, resolute. We fight or we fall divided. There is no other way. The camp tightened, breath held, like a held breath before a storm. Suspicion soaked into every glance, every pause. Outside, the wind whispered secrets through parched grass. And then, like a knife sliding through silk, the faintest sound, felt rather than heard, the drawn tightening of a bowstring in the dark. The ambush was coming. A messenger appeared, running hard and fast from the forest's edge, breath ragged, eyes wild with urgent warning. His voice broke the fragile silence. Enemies, closing in. An ambush lies ahead, the fragile peace shattered once more beneath the unforgiving sky. The field was still littered with fresh scars, the broken grass, trampled earth, and the heavy scent of sweat and blood mingling under the relentless sun. The attack had come swift and brutal, catching the tribe unprepared, even as they tightened their defenses. Shouts still echoed faintly, fading into the tense urgency that gripped the survivors. Jedediah moved among the fallen and wounded, his breath ragged, pulse pounding not just from exertion, but from the fierce dedication ignited by battle. Warriors lay sprawled in the dust, some clutching ragged wounds, others grimacing against pain, but glaring defiantly into the uncertain future. Nayeli's head hung low, her body bruised and trembling, the hollow ache of captivity already settling in her heart like a lead weight. She had been caught off guard, snatched in the chaos, swept away by shadows darker than the night itself. Jedediah's fists clenched at the memory, the moment his grasp slipped, the desperate cry that haunted his mind. Tayan's voice rose above the murmurs, strong and commanding, despite the exhaustion etched into his face. Our village is vulnerable. We cannot hold if we wait. Nayeli's capture makes this fight more than survival. It is a call for all of us to stand, to decide what we are willing to lose. Around the fire, the warriors exchanged glances heavy with doubt and determination. Some hesitated, outraged by Nayeli's fate. Others bristled at the very thought of defying ingrained traditions by risking all for one woman, especially one saved and sheltered by an outsider. Yet beneath the surface tension, an unspoken current stirred. The fragile bond between Jedediah and the tribe was being tested in the harshest way imaginable. Tayan paced with the restless energy of a man tormented by choices. Our ancestors taught us strength through unity, but also caution. To mount a rescue is to invite further peril. Some say we must wait, fortify here. Others think a rescue mission reckless. I will hear all, but the time to decide is now. Jedediah stepped forward, voice steady, though his hands trembled slightly. I do not ask for blind trust, but I offer my life for her return. Nayeli risked herself for this land and for me. We cannot abandon her. If we do, fear wins, and with it, our future. The tension split the council like lightning through dry timber. A fierce debate surged, voices rising in anger, heartbreak, hope, and stubborn pride. Tayan raised his hand, demanding silence. I call for a meeting, he announced, eyes locking on Jedediah's. A war council unlike any before. We will set aside old grievances. This rescue will be a test, not just of skill, but of our will to change. Pausing, he looked around the circle, the firelight casting shadows that danced like restless spirits. We are no longer fighting merely for land or revenge. We are fighting for what binds us: family, trust, survival. Nayeli, despite her pain, straightened with a fierce glint in her eyes. We cannot let the fear of tradition bind us in chains. If we fail to act, the enemy wins. Not just the battle, but the spirit of our people. Silence fell, heavy and resolute. Jedediah gathered a small group, those he trusted most, the warriors willing to risk everything. With familiars like Darok's reluctant nod and Tayyan's resolute gaze, they began preparations. Maps were spread on rough wooden tables, routes traced in ash and charcoal. The men and women chosen knew the harshness ahead. The terrain was unforgiving, the enemy ruthless. As the group readied to leave, Tayyan's voice lingered, heavy with meaning. This mission challenges tradition. We walk paths others will fear to tread, but Nayeli's life, our future, depend on it. Jedediah's heart thundered in his chest. This was more than a journey to save one woman. It was a crucible where their faith and courage would be forged anew. The village girded itself for defense. Elders healed, warriors sharpened weapons, and the walls of the encampment became battlegrounds waiting to erupt. Each breath, each beat of the drum, echoed a solemn vow to protect what remained. Into the shifting shadows, Jedediah mounted his horse alongside a handful of the fiercest Apache. Silent, determined, their faces painted with resolve, their eyes hard with purpose. The sky above was a deepening canvas, promises of stars faint but unwavering. Ahead lay the uncertain wild, the passage between hope and despair. As the group slipped away from the camp, a scout broke through the stillness, voice harsh and urgent. Enemy forces gather. This is no mere patrol. They come for war. Jedediah's grip tightened on the reins, gaze piercing the dusk. The weight of the mission stretched before them like the endless desert. Danger, sacrifice, and the fragile promise of reunion. Among the twisted mesas and shadowed ravines, the hunt for Nayeli had begun, and behind them, the encampment held its breath, readying for the storm that would soon break. The fight was far from over. The terrain stretched out like a ruthless maze beneath the scorching sun. Every ridge and canyon carved in stark relief against the burning sky. Jedediah led the small band forward, silent as dust on the wind, weaving through the cracked earth with a careful, practiced ease. His eyes flicked constantly to the horizon, sharp to every distant movement, every whisper of shifting stones or broken twigs. Nayeli rode close beside him, her breath steady, though her side ached beneath the ragged bandages. The pain was a dull hammer against her ribs, a reminder of the narrow margin between survival and surrender. "Water's scarce," Jedediah muttered, low, voice rough yet steady. "That creek we knew from the maps runs dry this season. We'll have to find a new source or risk losing ourselves in this wasteland." Nayeli's dark eyes scanned the cracked earth ahead, haunted by memories etched into the landscape. The stories her people told of long, merciless droughts. "I know the land too," she said, voice thin but resolute. "There's a basin beyond the ridge. It holds what we need, if the winds don't steal it first." Jedediah nodded grimly. "Then that's our path. Keep close. It's no place for wandering." The heat beat down like a merciless drum, sweat darkening leather and cotton alike. The sun blistered their skin, the dry air stealing moisture with every desperate breath. Shifting shadows lengthened uneasily beneath crags and mesquite clumps, hiding dangers, both natural and human. The silence was profound, broken only by the careful crunch of boots over brittle stones and the soft scrape of hooves against sparse grasses. But beneath this oppressive quiet, Jedediah's mind wrestled with ghosts no sun could burn away. The long years of isolation, the betrayals that had carved bitter scars deeper than any wound, hovered at his back. The thought of Nayeli, fragile and fierce, fueled a fire in his chest. This was no longer a man wandering lost. It was a reckoning with past failures, with old fears, and with the dangerous hope that had begun to root itself stubbornly in his heart. Suddenly, a slight movement caught Jedediah's eye, a barely audible shift beneath a shrub. His hand went to his rifle with instinctive speed. Nayeli stiffened beside him, her body coiled taut as a drawn bowstring. "There," Jedediah whispered, voice clipped. A figure slunk through the dust, low and shadowed. Enemy scouts, no doubt, threading their silent way between the rocks. The threat was closer than any of them wanted to admit. The hunters paused, scrambling toward a dry wash. Jedediah signaled the others, and the group melted into hidden cracks, pressing skin against scoured stone, breaths held tight, and hearts pounding a fierce rhythm. Minutes stretched like hours before the danger passed, the scouts' unseen footsteps fading into the heat's shimmering mirage. When at last Jedediah rose, his jaw was set with renewed purpose. "They're watching, waiting for us to falter. We cannot give them that. It's time." Nayeli's gaze hardened, pain shadowed in her eyes, but tempered by iron will. "Have no choice but to fight for every breath." Her voice was a quiet promise, dark and steady as desert night. "And every step we take will be for those who wait at the camp." The group pressed onward, the ground growing rougher, and the shadows deeper as the ridge towered ahead. Trust writhed uneasily in the silence between them, a fragile thread stretched tight by necessity and fading hope. At the crest, the basin came into view, a hollow carved by ancient water. Now a patchwork of cracked mud and sparse pools reflecting the vast sky. It was not the sanctuary they might have dreamed, but it was life. Jedediah dismounted quickly, bending low to test the foul water trickling weakly through the stone. "Drinkable, but scarce," he said, voice grim. "We'll have to ration carefully." Nayeli's lips pressed into a thin line. "Every drop counts. We cannot waste this chance." She scanned the basin's edges sharply, every muscle counting the dangers hidden in this arid cradle. As they gathered what scant water remained, a sudden sharp noise shattered the fragile calm, a distant echoing shout that curled like smoke over the stones. Jedediah froze, eyes darting to Nayeli, who tensed beside him. "There, beyond the ridge," Jedediah said, voice grim. "Enemy patrol. They've tracked us this far." The men exchanged silent, loaded looks. Time had slipped away faster than the water dripped from their hands. Nayeli's hand brushed the hilt of a small knife at her belt. Jedediah's fingers tightened on the worn wooden stock of his rifle. "Then we move, now." Jedediah's voice was steel, brittle, but unyielding. The group mounted and vanished into the maze of canyon shadows, hearts pounding against ribs, breath shallow and sharp. The wilderness itself seemed to hold its breath as they fled deeper into the tangled, treacherous land. Hours later, after twisted climbs and desperate sprints, Jedediah spotted a faint plume of smoke rising in the distance, curling above the mesquite like a fragile banner. "We made it," Nayeli whispered hoarsely. Relief and dread wove tightly around her words. But the danger isn't over. As they approached, voices rose sharply from the encampment. Stressed, determined, the rising tide of battle cries and hurried commands. The tribe was under siege. Jedediah's heart slammed against his ribs as the full weight of their ordeal crashed down. They had rescued Nayeli, but now the place they called sanctuary stood on the brink. In the end, the camp was surrounded, the scent of smoke and dust thick in the air. Warriors hurried to arm themselves, faces etched with fear and furious resolve. Jedediah met Nayeli's fierce gaze. "We came back in time, just." Her breath hitched, eyes glowing with fierce gratitude and unspoken fear. This is only the beginning. And as the sun sank low behind the distant hills, shadows lengthened across the camp, draping the tribe in a silence sharp as a blade, ready for the storm that would come with night. The final siege loomed. The Apache camp was a hive of activity, a taut anticipation simmering beneath every measured breath. Jedediah, Nayeli, and Tayan stood at the heart of the gathering, their voices melding with the distant clamor as warriors prepared for the decisive battle looming ahead. The sun hung low, casting long shadows that stretched and twisted across the dusty ground, painting the camp with a cloak of restless anxiety. Jedediah's eyes scanned the makeshift fortifications, fallen logs sharpened into crude stakes, piles of stone barricading narrow passes. He felt every muscle tense, every sinew pulled taut like a bowstring ready to snap. This was no longer a simple clash of blades or gunfire. It was a test of wills, a trial that would mark the future of both man and tribe. Nayeli adjusted the leather straps across her chest, her dark gaze fierce despite the lingering pain in her side. "They come not just for battle," she murmured, voice tight with foreboding. "They bring more than steel and lead. They want to break us, to sever the spirit that binds this land and its people." Tayan's jaw clenched, his voice low but unwavering. "If they think we will simply crumble beneath their assault, they misunderstand who we are. This tribe is more than blood and bone. It is the strength of our ancestors coursing through us. Together, we stand unyielding." The camp's murmurs swelled into a steady pulse. Warriors donned face paint in streaks of black and red, symbols of courage and defiance. Mothers whispered blessings over children sheltered behind hastily gathered canvas. Fires crackled with nervous energy, sending flickering tongues of flame licking the twilight. Jedediah moved among the gathered warriors, exchanging glances with those who had accepted him as one of their own. The ache in his heart deepened when his eyes met the solemn gaze of Tayan's younger brother, a boy no older than 12, nursing a fresh bandage. The boy's breaths were shallow, but his determination burned bright. As he looked away, Jedediah's fingers tightened faintly on his rifle, unwilling to let fear blind them. The blackened outline of the enemy force loomed on the ridgeline beyond the camp, a shifting wave of hostile shapes riding hard against the wind. The Mustang hooves drummed like thunder, a gathering storm, a relentless tide ready to crash. Nayeli stepped beside Jedediah, voice steady now, though soft. "This is not just a fight for survival. It is for trust. trust forged in fire and blood. We must show them the unity they dread. Jedediah met her gaze, the silent promise passing between them, a bridge spanning the chasm long carved by suspicion and conflict. "We fight as one," he said quietly, weight of his words tethering each to the moment's gravity. As night fell, the camp grew still, bathed in moonlight that washed the rugged terrain with ethereal silver. The warriors readied themselves, checking rifles, whispering prayers to unseen spirits. Tyon raised his hand, signaling for silence, a signal echoing through the quiet like a heartbeat. Then came the first shots, piercing the calm like thunderclaps. The enemy charged, a brutal tide crashing into the fragile bastion. The air was torn with cries of battle, the sharp report of rifles firing, and the clash of steel against steel. Jedediah fought side by side with Tyon's fiercest warriors, ducking behind broken wagons, firing with practiced precision, then charging to shield a wounded comrade. Every movement was a delicate balance between fury and control, skill and sheer will. Through the chaos, Naeli's voice rose, rallying the fighters with a clarity born of pain and purpose. "Hold for our ancestors, for this land! Stand strong!" The fight wove a tapestry of desperation and courage, a dance of survival amid swirling dust and shattered wood. Jedediah's breath came harsh and uneven, sweat stinging his eyes, but his resolve never wavered. He saw the glint of arrows streaking past, heard the clash of war cries, and felt the pulse of a bond forging beneath the firestorm. In the thick of battle, a shadow lunged forward, a man clad in dark leathers, marked by the enemy's symbol. Jedediah stepped into the path, rifle raised, meeting the man's cold glare. The stalemate stretched in the blink of an eye before a single shot rang out, echoing over the plains. The enemy faltered, giving ground as the tide began to turn. But Jedediah's gaze flicked beyond the skirmish, cold dread twisting within. There, at the edge of the chaos, the leader of their attackers emerged, an imposing figure cloaked in shadows, eyes blazing with ruthless intent. Time seemed to slow. The clash of war became a distant roar against the pounding of Jedediah's heart. He squared his shoulders, rifle ready, as the final confrontation approached. This was the moment when all lines would be drawn, when fate would be decided, not just by bullets, but by the fierce conviction of their spirits. He locked eyes with the enemy leader, the world narrowing to a frozen instant between two men standing on the edge of destruction. The outcome would shape not only their lives, but the fragile hope that had blossomed amidst the dust and desperate prayers. The final battle was about to begin. The camp was thick with tension, every breath caught between hope and despair. Jedediah's hands shook slightly as he tightened his grip on his rifle, the weight of what was to come pressing down like the unforgiving sun. Naeli, despite the pain that still gripped her wound, stood resolute beside him, eyes blazing with fierce determination. Tyon's silhouette cut a steady figure against the fading light, the marks of leadership etched deeply into his weathered face. The silence shattered as the first enemy war cry echoed across the ridge. The attackers charged, a dark storm of twisted shapes flowing like a river of shadows toward the APACHE encampment. Warriors snapped to readiness, paint-streaked faces set with unwavering defiance, hands steady on war clubs and rifles. Mothers hurried to secure children, who clung tightly to blankets woven with stories and survival. Jedediah moved through the fray with practiced precision, ducking behind a fallen wagon as bullets tore through the air. He saw Nayeli rally the fighters, her voice slicing through the chaos like a blade. "Hold the line. For our ancestors, for the land that binds us all." The fierce cry ignited the hearts of every soul beneath the vast western sky. Time surged and slowed all at once. Jedediah locked eyes with a snarling enemy warrior breaking through the line. Calm met fury as rifle raised, the bang cleaving the dusk air. The foe crumpled into the dust, his threat ended. Around him, the tide of battle writhing with desperation and courage. The tribe fought not just for survival, but for the fragile trust that glimmered between them. Then, a dark figure emerged from the swirl, the enemy leader. Cloaked in shadows, his gaze burned with ruthless intent. The world narrowed. Jedediah steadied himself, rifle aimed, every fiber pulled taut. This final confrontation would decide everything: the fate of the tribe, of Nayeli, and of the solitary man who had dared to cross the divide. The enemy leader charged, his aura a tempest of cold menace. Jedediah met him with unflinching eyes, the crack of gunfire ringing through the canyon like thunder. A dance of death unfolded. Every shot a declaration, every breath a guarded prayer. In the clash, Jedediah's understanding of the land's silent language lent him unseen advantage. He moved with shadowed grace, circling, the menace weaving between rock and fire. The decisive moment came suddenly. A flash, a shot, a cry. The enemy leader staggered, the ruthless fire dimming in his eyes. With the fall of their captain, the attacking force faltered, their wave of violence breaking into scattered retreat. Cheers rose from the Apache warriors, a fierce jubilation born of hard-fought survival. Jedediah lowered his rifle slowly, the adrenaline ebbing, but the weight of the victory settling deep into his bones. He turned toward Nayeli, whose fierce gaze softened as she struggled to her feet. Tayon approached, his face a patchwork of exhaustion, relief, and unshakable respect. "You fought like the blood of our ancestors flows through your veins," Tayon said quietly, voice heavy with meaning. "Not just a warrior, but a brother to our people." Nayeli's breath caught, voice trembling but filled with hope. This victory is more than battle won. It is the dawn of a bond long fractured. We rebuild, not just walls of wood and stone, but trust between our worlds. Jedediah met her gaze with unspoken understanding. Years of solitude and pain had led him here, standing amidst a tribe that no longer viewed him as an outsider, but as family. The fierce desert wind swept across the camp, carrying a scent of rain and renewal. As embers from the campfires flickered into the night sky, Tayon gathered the tribe. His voice rose in a solemn chant that wove through the dark, a promise and a covenant. "From this day forth, our people stand united. The loneliness of the past gives way to the strength of many. The broken paths are mended by shared blood and purpose." Nayeli stepped beside Jedediah, resting a hand lightly upon his. In her eyes shone a fierce fire softened by newly found peace. "You've given more than water and shelter," she whispered. "You've given us a future." The tribe around them murmured, a gentle wave of acceptance rolling through the hearts of every man, woman, and child beneath the endless sky. The scars of old battles remained, but so did a stubborn hope, a testament to resilience and the power of compassion to reshape even the harshest lands. Jedediah looked out over the vast horizon, the stars beginning their quiet watch above the desert plains. For the first time in a long while, the weight of loneliness lifted. He was no longer a man adrift. He was part of something greater, a family woven not by blood alone, but by the shared fight for survival, honor, and peace. The pounding of hooves had given way to the peaceful rustle of night winds through sagebrush. The horizon held no shadow of war, only the soft glow of a new dawn waiting beyond the ridge. The story that had begun in suspicion and pain reached its end under these vast western skies, a story of crossing divides and finding strength where none seemed possible. Jedediah, Nayeli, and Tayan stood united, guardians of a fragile peace now forged in fire and resolve. Together, they turned toward the future, united not as solitary souls lost in a harsh world, but as a tribe reborn. And as the silent stars bore witness, the desert breathed once more, quiet, enduring, and full of promise.